in the manner that they have been prepared to date. Thank you.
Je remercie M. Ferreira de Serpa Soares de son exposé. Je donne maintenant la parole aux membres du Conseil qui souhaitent faire une déclaration. Je donne la parole au représentant de la Fédération de Russie.
Господин председатель, мы благодарим господина Сараша, юридического советника ООН, за его брифинг. С учетом желания наших западных коллег раскручивать фейки про некие дроны, которые Иран якобы поставляет России, хотел бы с самого начала расставить точки над «и». Мы созвали это заседание по иному вопросу. Для обсуждения вопроса выполнения резолюции Совета Безопасности 2231 есть формат 2231, соответствующий полугодовые заседания Совета. Вопрос, который мы обсуждаем сегодня, гораздо шире и касается рисков, которые создают действия отдельных членов Совета для целостности Устава ООН и способности Совета Безопасности выполнять его ключевую функцию по поддержанию международного мира и безопасности. Речь идет о задокументированных попытках Соединенных Штатов, Великобритании и Франции, к которым также примкнула Федеративная Республика Германия, дать индивидуальное прямое поручение секретариату ООН в нарушении статьи 100 Устава ООН. В распространенном на сайте безопасности 21 октября письме постоянных представителей Великобритании, Франции и ФРГ С-2022-781 сказано, что они бы, цитирую, приветствовали проведение команды секретариата ООН, ответственной за мониторинг выполнения резолюции 2231, расследование и готовы оказать содействие работе секретариата в проведении им технического и независимого расследования. В развитии заявления данных стран о якобы имевших место нарушениях резолюции 2231. В письме постоянного представителя Соединенных Штатов С-2022-782 Соединенные Штаты прямо требуют, чтобы секретариат ООН провел такое расследование. Это не российская пропаганда, как любят говорить наши западные коллеги, а факты. Любой желающий может ознакомиться с этими письмами. Данные письма – документальное свидетельство того, что перечисленные делегации нарушают пункт 2 статьи 100 Устава ООН, предписывающий каждому члену ООН уважать строго международный характер обязанностей секретариата ООН и не пытаться оказать на его сотрудников влияние при осуществлении ими своих обязанностей. Более того, Соединенные Штаты, Великобритания, Франция и ФРГ фактически подталкивают секретариат к двойному нарушению. Во-первых, пункты 1 статьи 100 Устава ООН, согласно которому секретариат не должен получать инструкции от какого-либо правительства. Во-вторых, собственно, мандаты секретариата в контексте резолюции Совета Безопасности 2231 заставляя его действовать ультравирус. На втором моменте хочу остановиться подробнее. Мы из раза в раз слышим от западной делегации, что секретариат ООН якобы уполномочен заниматься мониторингом выполнения резолюции 2231. Эти заявления не соответствуют действительности. В пункте 2а записки председателя Совета Безопасности С-2016-44, озаглавленной «Задачи Совета Безопасности в контексте резолюции 2231», прямо указано, что мониторингом выполнения данного документа уполномочен заниматься сам Совет Безопасности. Под пункты С и Д черным по белому написано, что именно Совет отвечает на запросы государств-членов касательно выполнения резолюции и вырабатывает ответ при получении информации о возможных нарушениях резолюции. В пункте 4 упомянутой записки говорится, что для осуществления данных функций, включая те, которые связаны с получением информации от государств-членов, Совет Безопасности должен собираться на неформальные заседания на экспертном уровне. Таким образом, очевидно, что любая информация, поступающая от государств-членов, from member states needs to be considered by the members of the Security Council during these informal meetings. I wish to draw attention to the fact that the note has no mention whatsoever of the role of the Secretariat in this process. Further, it's important that in line with paragraph 5 of the above-mentioned note, the Security Council is to strive to take decisions vis-à-vis implementation of their functions in the context of Resolution 2231 by consensus through by launching an at least 5-day no objection procedure. This means that any action vis-à-vis the functions of paragraph 1, be it monitoring of the implementation of the resolution or work with information about potential violation thereof, requires a separate decision of the Security Council. This decision vis-à-vis the statement about allegations of violations of Resolution 2231 by Iran and the Russian Federation is something which the Council did not adopt. Furthermore, it is clear that among its membership there are principal differences, principal and fundamental differences in the membership about this. I would draw attention to paragraph 6 of the note, which has an exhaustive list of the functions of the UN Secretariat vis-à-vis Resolution 2231. I quote, to assist the facilitator in the organization staffing of informal meetings of the Council, manage all incoming and outgoing communications related to implementation of the resolution, and assist the facilitator in corresponding with member states on behalf of the Security Council, draft correspondence, speaking notes, and briefings of the facilitator, maintain and archive all information and the documents relating to the Security Council's work related to the implementation of the resolution, maintain and promote publicly available information on the restrictions imposed by the Security Council, including through the website, to provide administrative support for the Security Council's review of recommendations from the Joint Commission, the JCPOA. As you can see, this list has no mention of the conduct of any investigation whatsoever. In subpara G, it explicitly says that the Secretariat can perform any other task only upon the request of the Security Council. No additional request, especially the conduct of an investigation, did the Council give the Secretariat. We have observed attempts by Western colleagues and representatives of the Secretariat to justify their conduct of an investigation referring to paragraph 7 of the note. They, among other things, allege that the biannual report of the Secretary General should include that the English version of the document, what is called findings, and the semantics of this word as if presupposes that there should have been certain findings carried out, and they should be found. But this is yet another distortion. The text here talks not about findings, but about analytical conclusions. And this is specifically how this word is translated in the note in all official UN languages. In French, les conclusions; in Russian, выводы; in Spanish, las conclusiones; in Chinese, jiao, and in Arabic, nataij. Mr. President, the actions of Western delegations demanding that the Secretariat carry out an investigation into the drone issue creates an exceedingly dangerous precedent for the work of the Security Council. From the legal standpoint, they are seeking to artificially expand the prerogatives of the Security Council to vest it with functions that are beyond its purview and the prerogatives of the Security Council. This approach is at odds with the core principles of operations of the United Nations, including the separation of authority between its main bodies and specialized bodies. It runs counter to basic logic if, on questions of essence and politics, the Secretariat responds single-handedly and decides issues based on instructions from certain states, then why are collective bodies such as the Secretariat, such as the General Assembly and Security Council necessary? I would stress that the presence of instructions of the Secretariat to draft a report on implementation of the resolution in principle does not imply automatically vesting the Secretariat with function to collect and respond to information from member states about possible violations thereof. This is something which sanctions committees of the Security Council are authorized to do with the support of their panels of experts, not the UN Secretariat. it. We all understand, I hope, that the 2231 unit, by definition, cannot be a sanctions committee, insofar as this is a department of the Secretariat. I think that it is now clear to everybody that in the context of Resolution 2231, the Secretariat serves solely as a contact point. So for this reason, we believe that the only thing that it can do, having received the correspondence from the UK, France, Germany, and the US, is to hand them over to the coordinator of the 2231 format for consideration among the Security Council membership. And the Secretary General's report can reflect solely the fact that the letters were received. We see in the conduct of Western delegations yet another manifestation of egregious hypocrisy and double standards. They portray themselves as the main champions of respect for the UN Charter, including calls for upholding the principles of the United Nations Charter in various resolutions of the General Assembly, and they accuse other member states of violating them. But what do we see, in fact? It turns out when this is necessary for them, those same members of the Security Council who literally two weeks ago, in this chamber, foaming at the mouth, talked about the need to protect the UN Charter, today are openly violating it and prompting the Secretary to do so as well. The U.S. has for 4 years themselves been violating Resolution 2231. In 2018, they unilaterally withdrew from the JCPOA. For the U.S., this is some kind of a novel, unprecedented for the United Nations level of contempt for the Charter and resolutions of the Security Council. Unfortunately, this open political pressure is something which the Secretary is not particularly resisting. We heard a statement from the official representative of the Secretary General about the willingness to analyze any information received by member states. This statement and such statements run counter to the letter and spirit of Article 100 of the UN Charter and Resolution 2231. This all poses grave risks for the integrity of the United Nations Charter, the effectiveness of the work of the Security Council, and the organization as a whole. We call on members of the Council to protect the Charter, to condemn such action by Western delegations, as well as to clearly speak out in favor of compliance by the Secretariat with Article 100 of the Charter and its mandate, and the mandate in line with the frameworks established for the Security Council in Note S2016/44. We would also request that Mr. Sharish confirm that the investigation that constitutes a violation of Article 100 of the Charter, and consent to this by the Secretariat would also constitute a violation thereof. Thank you.
Je remercie le représentant de la Fédération de Russie pour sa déclaration. Je donne la parole au représentant des États-Unis.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Undersecretary General Miguel de Serpa Suarez, for your briefing. The claim Russia is making is dumbfounding, simply dumbfounding. Once again, Russia has wasted the Security Council's time to deflect attention from its own egregious wrongdoing. Russia claims that requests from the United States and other countries that the Secretary General investigate Russia's and Iran's violations of UN Security Council Resolution 2231 are a supposed violation of Article 100 of the Charter. Article 100 provides that, and I quote, the Secretary General and the staff shall not seek or receive any instructions from any government, unquote. The requests of the United States and other council members were not instructions. They, similar to countless other requests made to the Secretary General by UN member states, were requests that he take appropriate action. Many member states make requests like this to the Secretary General, including Russia. Indeed, as recently as August of this year, Russia requested that the Secretary General investigate killings at a prison in eastern Ukraine. The Secretary General, in response to this request, decided to conduct a fact-finding mission. Far from constituting instructions to the Secretary General, such requests for investigations are common, appropriate, and by no means in violation of Article 100 of the UN Charter. But this situation is even more clear-cut, given the unique language and mandate in Security Council Resolution 2231. As colleagues will recall, this important resolution was adopted in July 2015 as the Iran nuclear deal was finalized. It established critical restrictions on Iran that would last for a period of years. All council members, including Russia, voted for it. Russia was involved in negotiating its provisions. In this case, Russia and Iran teamed up to violate Resolution 2231. Iran, in violation of Resolution 2231, provided Russia with drones to wreak havoc and inflict destruction on Ukrainian civilians. Russia, in violation of Resolution 2231, procured them. Iran has been open and vocal about its support, and there is no doubt that the transfer occurred without approval by the Council, and thus in violation of Resolution 2231. The Security Council itself asked the Secretary General to play a vital role reporting on violations of this resolution. It is therefore well within the authority of the Secretary General to investigate Russia's and Iran's violations of Resolution 2231. That resolution explicitly asked the Secretary General to report every 6 months on the implementation of that resolution's provisions. At the time it was adopted, and in the 7 years since, Council members have understood this mandate to include investigations of alleged violations of that resolution, typically following reports of concerns by member states. In fact, there is ample precedent for the UN Secretariat to carry out independent investigations as part of this mandate to report on implementation. Over the past 7 years, the Secretary General has submitted to the Security Council 13 reports summarizing its investigations and findings on noncompliance. For example, in the report contained in S/2017/1030, the Secretary General reported on an investigation of allegations that Iranian-supplied ballistic missiles were used by the Houthis in attacks against Saudi Arabia. The Secretary General reported on a visit to Saudi Arabia, examination of the weapons debris, and other investigative actions taken by the Secretariat in response to the allegations. More recently, in response to an invitation from the authorities of Saudi Arabia, the Secretariat traveled to Riyadh in October 2021 to examine the debris from 6 ballistic missiles tied to the Houthi attacks. The Secretariat's team also went to Israel in 2021 to inspect Iranian UAVs that had infiltrated Israeli airspace. In each of these cases, crucially, the Secretary General's report did not just consist of verbatim repetition of allegations of violations of Resolution 2231 and/or assertions of denials of the same by member states. Instead, the Secretariat engaged in its own investigations in order to evaluate the allegations so that it could report, as it is mandated to do, on the extent to which the alleged violations impacted the implementation of Resolution 2231 by member states. It is thus well established that it is well within the authority of the Secretary General to investigate allegations of violations of Resolution 2231. The United States and other requests that the Secretary General investigate the latest violations by Iran and Russia were appropriate and urgently needed. Russia's response, that the Ukraine report should be treated differently and that the UN leadership should block the investigations typically undertaken in these cases, is deeply troubling and inconsistent with years of this Council's practice. Now we see Russia making threats against the United Nations. For reasons that are obvious to all, Russia seeks to obstruct and confuse. But yielding to these threats and acceding to Russia's demand that the Secretariat not carry out its 2231 mandate in this instance would be extremely problematic. It would undermine implementation of UN Security Council resolutions and give all countries, including Russia, a free pass to flout Security Council-imposed obligations. The United States regrets that Russia has once again abused its position as a Council member to waste this body's time and seek to hide its own violations of our resolutions. Thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie le représentant des États-Unis de sa déclaration. Je donne maintenant la parole au représentant de l'Inde.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will be brief. Let me begin by thanking USG for Legal Affairs for its briefing. India appreciates the important work of the UN Secretariat in supporting the Security Council. We value the periodic reports of the Secretary General to the Security Council and the professional work that goes behind the preparation of such reports. In preparing these reports, the Secretariat should always be guided by the mandate provided in the Council's resolution, presidential statements, and notes of the President. In the current context, Para 7 of Note 44 of 2016 by the Security Council President clearly requested the Secretary General to report to the Security Council every 6 months on the implementation of Resolution 2231. We hope that the Secretariat will continue to objectively function on such issues and undertake its activities in accordance with the mandate provided by this Council. Respect for provisions of the UN Charter is an absolute must. I thank you.
Je remercie le représentant de l'Inde de sa déclaration. Je donne maintenant la parole au représentant de l'Albanie.
We don't have a speakers list, huh? He has one.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I also thank USG Suarez for its pertinent clarifications. The raison d'être of the Secretariat is to execute its mandate with objectivity and impartiality, without fear or favor, and that involves also reminding states of their obligations and the degree to which they adhere to them. Impartiality doesn't mean indifference, detachment from reality when commitments are not upheld and when the law is broken. This is why we strongly value the work of the Secretariat in their attempts to ensure consistency and continuity in the application of the UN Charter in the service of all member states without distinctions. This is why we rightly expect all states to respect its prerogatives and cooperate in good faith with the Secretariat. Threats against it are unconscionable and further profess the total disregard of the rules that underpin our organization. The Secretariat should not yield to such threats. Equally, member states should not heed any demands that may prevent them from carrying their duties in discharging their obligations, including on the matter at hand, the monitoring mandate for Resolution 2231. This would create a dangerous precedent. It would undermine the implementation of United Nations Security Council resolutions and create the impression that some countries can disregard obligations at will and with impunity. Mr. President, we all know to read the rules and the Charter and what we have adopted, but that's not the key issue. Let's come to the core issue, which is the denial that Russia has deployed Iran-made UAVs against civilian infrastructure in Ukraine, which, as we know, are wreaking havoc and killing civilians. If what Russia says is the truth, if it has nothing to hide, if it is implementing Security Council resolutions, upholding the Charter, and it is respecting international law, although the General Assembly thinks that is not the case, then in the interest of the truth and clarity, Russia must be the first to welcome an independent and impartial verification to bring the truth to light. Welcome it and not threaten mandate holders, and the first of them, the Secretary General. In 2015, the Council adopted Resolution 2231 to endorse the Iran nuclear deal and keep in place certain critical restrictions for a period of years on Iran. The resolution asked the Secretary General to, and I quote, report to the Security Council on the implementation of these provisions every 6 months, and it was amply mentioned by the legal advisor. With the adoption of the resolution, the Security Council fully supported the Secretariat in establishing a team and a process to monitoring its implementation. And member states have supported through years the UN Secretariat 2231 team by providing information and analysis. As mentioned by the legal advisor, in the last 7 years, the Secretary General has done so. It has submitted 13 reports summarizing its investigations and findings on report of non-compliance based on many visits and inspections by the 2231 team. And the US delegation mentioned, but I want to mention again myself as well. So in December 21, the Secretary General recalled the Secretariat's visit. It was a Secretariat visit to Saudi Arabia to examine debris of 6 ballistic missiles from the Houthis. The Secretariat team went also to Israel in 2021 to inspect Iranian UAVs that had infiltrated Israel airspace. How these cases are different from the Iran-produced UAVs that are being used today by Russia in Ukraine. Mr. President, a member state, Ukraine, has submitted a request to the President of the Security Council based on its own evidence that Russia has used UAVs of Iranian production and origin, whose transfer is clearly prohibited by 2231 resolution. Reliable sources have shown Russia is using those UAVs, including against civilian infrastructure in Ukraine. Such procurements and transfers are a clear violation of Para 4 of Annex B of the resolution, and 2 member states, Russia and Iran, are in clear breach of that resolution. This is why we reiterate our call to the Secretariat to do its job and not get lost in intentionally confusing semantics when its mandate is clear. Organize visits in sites, which Ukraine has offered to facilitate, collect evidence, and report about its findings. Following its well-established procedure, the UN 2231 team should analyze the available evidence impartially and report its findings to the Security Council, and we look forward to that report. And I thank you.
Je remercie le représentant de l'Albanie de sa déclaration. Je donne maintenant la parole au représentant de la France.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President,
la France regrette profondément
France
le
deeply
cynisme
regrets the
dont fait
cynicism
preuve la Russie
shown by Russia
en convoquant une
by
réunion sur
convening a
l'intégrité de la
meeting on
Charte
the
des Nations
integrity
Unies.
of the United Nations Charter,
Car c'est bien la Russie qui n'a
because it
cessé
is
de
indeed
violer la
Russia that
Charte
has not
et
stopped
de fouler aux
being in
pieds
breach
ses
of the
principes
Charter and
en
running
envahissant son
roughshod over the
voisin
principles of the
et
Charter
en
by
annexant ses
invading its
territoires.
neighbor
C'est la
and annexing
Russie
its territory.
qui a
It is
voté
Russia
dans
that
l'isolement le
voted
plus
in
complet
the most complete
contre une résolution
isolation
de l'Assemblée générale
against the
soutenue
General
par
Assembly
143
resolution,
pays
which
et
was supported
intitulée
by
Défendre
143
les
countries,
principes de la
entitled
Charte des
Defending the
Nations Unies.
Principles of the United Nations Charter.
Monsieur le Président, je
Mr.
tiens à
President,
remercier
I would like
le
to thank
secrétariat
the
d'avoir
Secretariat
précisé les
for
dispositions de la
providing
résolution
the
2231
provisions
et le
of
rôle du
Resolution
secrétariat
2231
dans sa mise en œuvre.
and specifying the role of the Secretariat
Les
in
faits sont
implementing
très
it.
clairs.
The facts are clear.
L'Iran a fourni des drones à la
Iran
Russie
provided
qui
drones
les a
to Russia,
utilisés au
which
service
then
de
used
sa guerre
them
d'agression
in the service
dans
of
des
its war of
bombardements
aggression
indiscriminés
and in
contre des
indiscriminate
cibles
bombing
civiles.
against civilian targets.
Ces faits,
These facts,
susceptibles de constituer des crimes
which
de
might
guerre, sont
be
solidement
war
documentés.
crimes, are solidly documented.
La fourniture de ces drones par l'Iran,
Supplying these
sans
drones
approbation préalable du Conseil,
without prior
représente
approval
une
of the
violation
Council
du
is a
paragraphe 4 de
violation by
l'annexe B
Iran of
de la
paragraph
résolution
4 of
2231.
Annex B of Resolution 2231.
Cette résolution, je le rappelle, avait été
This
adoptée
resolution, I would
en
recall
juillet
here, was
2015 à
adopted in
l'unanimité des membres
July
du Conseil.
2015 unanimously by members
La
of the
France
Council.
demande à l'Iran de cesser
France
immédiatement
asks
toute
that
forme
Iran
de soutien
immediately
à la
cease
guerre
any
d'agression
form of support
lancée par la
to
Russie
the war
contre
of
l'Ukraine.
aggression launched by
Elle
Russia
demande que
against Ukraine.
cesse la
It also
violation
asks
de la résolution
that it stop
2231.
violation of Resolution 2231.
La France souhaite que le secrétariat enquête
Would like
et
the Secretariat to
les membres du
investigate
Conseil
and report to the members of the
afin que le
Council so
secrétaire
that the
général
Secretary General
puisse rendre
can
compte
then
fidèlement de la
faithfully
mise en œuvre
report on
de la résolution
implementation of Resolution
2231
2231,
comme il a le mandat de le
as
faire 2
he
fois
was
par an
mandated to
depuis
do twice
2015.
a year since
Le secrétariat
2015.
s'est déjà
Indeed, the
déployé
Secretariat
à
has
plusieurs
already
reprises par le
undertaken
passé
efforts a number of times
dans
in
des
the past
circonstances similaires
in similar
pour
circumstances
enquêter
to
impartialement
impartially investigate
sur des violations de
breaches
la résolution
of Resolution
2231.
2231.
Le représentant russe nous a affirmé
The
le
Russian
19
representative
octobre
affirmed
en
on the
consultation
19th of October in
que les drones en
consultations
question
that the drones
étaient des drones
in
russes.
question were Russian drones.
Dès lors, on
Since
comprend mal
then,
pourquoi la
it's
Russie
difficult to
ne souhaite
understand
pas
why Russia does not want
que l'on puisse expertiser les débris.
us to look at the debris with experts.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr.
soyons
President,
clairs,
let's be clear.
c'est la Russie
It is
qui ne
Russia
respecte
that
pas
is not
l'article
respecting
100
Article
de la
100
Charte des
of the
Nations
United
Unies
Nations Charter
et l'indépendance
and
du
the
secrétariat.
Secretariat's independence.
En effet, c'est la Russie
Indeed,
qui exerce
it
un
is
chantage
Russia that is
en
engaging
menaçant
in
de rompre les
blackmail
liens avec les
by
Nations
threatening
Unies
to
si le
break
secrétariat
ties with the
ne se
United
plie
Nations
pas à sa
if the
volonté
Secretariat
au
does
lieu
not bend to its
d'exécuter
will
son mandat.
rather than fulfilling
La
its
France
mandate.
continuera d'apporter
France
son
will
soutien à
continue
l'Ukraine,
to support
de même qu'elle
Ukraine,
continuera
as
d'appuyer
it will also
autant qu'il est
continue
nécessaire
to support
le
as much
travail
as
que mène le
necessary
secrétariat
the
avec
work
professionnalisme,
undertaken by the Secretariat
intégrité
with
et
professionalism,
indépendance.
integrity, and
Je vous remercie.
independence. Thank you.
Je remercie le
I
représentant de la
thank the
France de sa
representative of
déclaration. Je
France
donne
for that
maintenant la
statement. I
parole à
now
la
give the
représentante
floor
de l'Irlande.
to the representative of Ireland.
Thank you, President, and I would like to thank the Undersecretary General for his very useful briefing today. President, we welcome Ukraine's invitation for the UN Secretariat to visit Ukraine to inspect recovered UAVs with regards to the implementation of Resolution 2231 by parties, and expect the Secretariat to keep the Council informed as appropriate on this matter. We see this request by a state with legitimate concerns regarding the implementation of Resolution 2231 as fully in keeping with both the UN Charter and the terms of Resolution 2231 and Note 44. Note 44 clearly sets out that the Secretary-General should report on the implementation of Resolution 2231 every 6 months, and for the Council in 2231 format to review his findings and recommendations. The necessary technical investigations that the Secretariat conducts are an integral part of preparing these findings. No further decision by the Council is necessary in this regard. The Secretary-General's reports play an essential role in assisting the Council in its mandated task to monitor the implementation of the resolution and to take action as appropriate to improve the implementation by Member States of the resolution. President, with regards to Article 100 of the UN Charter, unfortunately it is Russia that is seeking to influence the Secretary-General and staff in the discharge of their responsibilities, including through this meeting. It is clear that the Secretariat is acting in good faith on the instructions that the Council has given it. If these instructions are to change, this must be agreed by the Council in line with Note 44 and cannot be dictated by any one member. I hope that Russia will cooperate as necessary with the Secretariat in the conduct of its work and provide any information required to clarify these issues regarding the implementation of Resolution 2231. Thank you.
Je remercie la représentante de l'Irlande de cette déclaration. Je donne la parole à la représentante du Ghana.
Thank you, Mr. President. I join previous delegations in thanking USG, Mr. Serpa Suarez, for his briefing and for clarifying the role of the United Nations Secretariat in relation to the implementation of Security Council Resolution 2231. Our Russian colleagues have suggested that the joint request by France, Germany, and the United Kingdom for an investigation by the Secretariat's team responsible for the monitoring and implementation of Resolution 2231 into the reported transfer from Iran to the Russian Federation of unmanned aerial vehicles being used in Ukraine constitutes a violation of the United Nations Charter. Ghana is fully supportive of the objectives of 2231, which has at its core the protection of all humanity from the dangers of nuclear capacities. We therefore urge full compliance with its provisions and support the investigations of any violations through appropriate channels. The issues that presently confront us, however, is the continuing aggression of the Russian Federation against Ukraine and the imperatives for the reversal of such action. We continue to be deeply concerned by the Russian Federation's unjustified invasion of the sovereign territory of Ukraine, its targeted attacks against civilians, and the deliberate destruction of civilian and critical infrastructure in violation of the principles of international law and the values and purposes of the Charter of the United Nations. It is these actions by the Russian Federation and its subsequent wielding of the veto in a manner that has so far restrained requisite Council action that casts doubt on our ability to deliver on the mandate to promote international peace and security as it relates to Ukraine. This is the reality that threatens the peace and stability of our international system and regrettably impugns the integrity of our organization. We reiterate our call on the Russian Federation to immediately and unconditionally withdraw its troops from the internationally recognized borders of Ukraine and bring an end to the war which has not only affected Ukraine and its people, but has also precipitated unpleasant socioeconomic challenges, especially for developing countries like Ghana. We remain deeply concerned by the prevailing conditions marked by intense fighting and heightened rhetoric relating to the use or threat of use of various forms of weapons of mass destruction. We are also concerned that the requirements for nuclear safety and security at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant are yet to be implemented. We strongly urge restraint and caution against such rhetoric being used as justification for any tactical use of nuclear weapons. The precarious conditions in Ukraine and the tendency for its rapid escalation highlights the urgency to intensify diplomatic efforts to end the hostilities and further help the parties on a pathway to a pacific settlement of the conflict through dialogue. I close by reaffirming Ghana's full support for the sovereignty, political independence, and territorial integrity of Ukraine. I thank you, President.
Je remercie la représentante du Ghana de sa déclaration. Je donne maintenant la parole au représentant du Brésil.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me start by thanking USG Serpa Soares for the clarifications presented. Brazil takes note of the letters circulated jointly by the missions of France, Germany, and the United Kingdom, S/2022/781, as well as the letters circulated by the mission of the United States, S/2022/782, and the mission of the Russian Federation, S/2022/783. The letters draw the attention of Council members to the implementation of Resolution 2231. More particularly, the letter circulated by the Russian Federation refers also to Article 100 of the UN Charter. It is our understanding that under Presidential Note S/2016/44, paragraph 7, dated 16 January 2016, the Secretary General was mandated to, and I quote, report to the Security Council every 6 months on the implementation of Resolution 2231. End quote. Any further action beyond this mandate should be discussed by the Security Council, including responding to information regarding alleged actions inconsistent with the resolution, in accordance with Article 2D of the Presidential Note. Nonetheless, it is worth recalling that in similar situations in the past, the Secretariat traveled in response to an invitation from concerned member states to examine and collect relevant information for its regular reporting. Such was the case described in previous reports of the Secretary General on the implementation of Resolution 2231. Brazil trusts that the Secretariat will continue to carry out its mandate strictly in accordance with Note S/2016/44 and Article 100, preserving its exclusively international character. In an ever more complex international security context, the JCPOA provides a suitable framework for dialogue among the parties concerned. Brazil counts on the collective commitment of the JCPOA's original participants to conclude negotiations and immediately resume full compliance with their respective obligations under the agreement and with Resolution 2231 of this Council. I thank you.
Je remercie le représentant du Brésil de sa déclaration. Je donne maintenant la parole à la représentante de la Norvège.
Thank you, President. We thank USG Soares for his briefing. Norway fully supports the Secretariat's role in implementing Resolution 2231. The reported transfer of UAVs from Iran to Russia for use in Ukraine is of great concern. These drones are used to attack civilians and civilian objects. This usage is prohibited under international humanitarian law and may constitute war crimes. The transfer of such UAVs would also be a violation of Resolution 2231, Annex B, Paragraph 4. In Security Council Presidential Note of S/2016/44, Paragraph 7, the Secretary General was requested to report biannually on the implementation of Resolution 2231, including his findings and recommendation. In fulfillment of this request, the Secretary General has reported 13 times to the Council. Many of the findings have been based on first-hand assessments of evidence collected on the ground, and many of the assessments have been initiated based on letters from member states with information of potential violations and actions inconsistent with the provisions contained in Resolution 2231, Annex B. These letters have also included travel invitations from relevant authorities in order for the UN to conduct necessary first-hand assessments. In our view, There is nothing about the conduct of the Secretariat in connection with the request put forward in the letter from Ukraine that could substantiate the Russian claims of misconduct. Let me recall that Article 100 of the UN Charter requires each member state of the UN to respect the impartiality of the Secretary-General and his staff and not to influence them in the discharge of their responsibilities. We regret that Russia, through accusing others of violating this principle, is in fact itself disregarding the spirit of Article 100. This can only be understood as an attempt to draw attention away from Russia's own illegal war and actions. Thank you.
Je remercie la représentante de la Norvège de sa déclaration. Je donne maintenant la parole au représentant du Mexique.
Gracias, presidente.
Thank you,
Agradecemos la información
We
muy
appreciate the
valiosa que
information,
nos ha
the very
proporcionado
worthwhile information
el
provided
secretario general adjunto,
by
el
the
señor Miguel de
Undersecretary
Serpa
General,
Suárez.
Mr. Miguel de Serpa Suárez.
Me referiré
I
brevemente
will
a
briefly
dos asuntos
address two
relevantes sobre el tema que
issues that are
nos
relevant
ocupa,
to the topic
toda vez
that
que la
we are examining today,
convocatoria a esta reunión sobre el
especially since the
mantenimiento de
convening
la
of this
paz y la
meeting
seguridad
on
internacionales
maintaining international
es
peace and
propicia
security
para
is
refrendar nuestra
appropriate
posición
for
sobre algunos
referencing our
aspectos de
position
la guerra que
on
tiene
some
lugar en
aspects of the war
Ucrania
which
desde
is
hace
taking
más de
place
8 meses.
in Ukraine and has been for more
Primero,
than 8 months.
conviene recordar
First,
que los convenios de
it's
Ginebra de
appropriate to recall here that the
1949 y sus protocolos
Conventions of Geneva
adicionales
of 1949 and
contienen
additional protocols
disposiciones puntuales
contain
sobre las
specific
obligaciones de las
provisions
partes en
on
conflicto
obligations of
que deben
parties in
distinguir
conflict
a la población civil
who are
de
supposed
los
to
combatientes.
distinguish between the
Con
civilian
base en
population
ello es que
and
hemos
combatants.
condenado
Based on
los
that,
ataques
we
indiscriminados y
have condemned
desproporcionados
the
que han
disproportionate
tenido
and
lugar contra la
indiscriminate
población
attacks
civil en Ucrania,
against the civilian
incluidos los más
population in
recientes
Ukraine, including
con
the most
vehículos
recent attacks
aéreos no
using
tripulados. No
UAVs.
existe justificación
There
alguna
is no
para los
justification
ataques en
whatsoever
contra de edificios
for attacks
residenciales,
against residential
infraestructura de
buildings,
servicios básicos u
infrastructure for
otros
basic
objetivos
services, or
civiles.
other civilian targets.
Reiteramos, pues,
We would
nuestro
thus
llamado a
reiterate
poner un
our
alto
call
a estas
to put a
agresiones.
stop to these aggressions.
Segundo, ante
Second,
los alegatos
given the
contradictorios
conflicting
sobre el
allegations
origen de los
on
drones
the
que
origin
atacaron
of
a
the
la
drones that
población
attacked
civil,
the civilian population,
consideramos que la
we
comunidad
believe that the international
internacional
community
debe saber la verdad
must know the
y
truth,
para ello se requiere
and to that end,
una investigación
an
independiente que dé
independent
lugar a un
investigation is
dictamen
required
creíble,
that would then give way to
toda
a
vez que hay
credible
una
ruling.
solicitud para que la
As long as
Secretaría de
there
las
is a
Naciones
request
Unidas
for the United
investigue
Nations
el
Secretariat
origen
to
de los drones
investigate the
utilizados
origin
en
of the
tales
drones
ataques
used in these attacks,
y en tanto que se
and
ha señalado su
given
posible
that
fabricación
their
iraní,
manufacture
delegación,
was possibly Iranian.
después de haber
This request
hecho el análisis jurídico
was done after
correspondiente,
corresponding legal analysis,
considera que dicha solicitud
we
es
believe that the
procedente
request
de conformidad
is
con
in
las
keeping
disposiciones
with
contenidas
the
en la
provisions set
resolución
forth in
2231.
Resolution 2231.
Igualmente, no
Also,
consideramos
we do not
que una
believe
investigación sea
that an
contraria a las
investigation would run
disposiciones
counter
contenidas
to
en
the
el artículo
provisions set
100
forth in
de la
Article
Carta.
100 of the Charter.
El secretario general
The Secretary
goza
General
asimismo de
is also
facultades conforme a la Carta
endowed
para
with
realizar las
authority
determinaciones
under
que
the Charter
resulten
to undertake
de las
determinations
solicitudes
that
que le
are the
formulen
result
los
of the
Estados
requests put
miembros por
forth by member
conducto de los
states
órganos
by way
competentes.
of the competent
Ello
organs.
resulta de la práctica
This is
establecida
the result of
con
established
base en el
practice
artículo 99
as
de la
based on
Carta
Article
que
99
define el
of the
papel
Charter,
del secretario general
which
en
defines the
materia
role
de
of the Secretary General
prevención de
in the
situaciones
area of
susceptibles de
prevention
poner en
of
peligro
situations that
la
might
paz y la seguridad
endanger
internacional.
international peace and security.
Concluyo insistiendo
I would conclude my
que este
remarks by
Consejo
stressing the fact
debería
that this
abocarse
Council
a
should
encontrar una
focus on
solución
finding a
diplomática
diplomatic
e
solution
impulsar nuevos
and
mecanismos
promoting
de
new
mediación
mediation
que
mechanisms
fortalezcan los
that would
esfuerzos
then
del secretario
strengthen the
general
Secretary General's
para
efforts
lograr que cesen las
undertaken
hostilidades
in
en
order to bring
Ucrania,
about a
pues
cessation of
es la
hostilities
única
in
manera de
Ukraine, because that is
proteger
the only way
cabalmente
to
a la
completely
población
protect
civil.
the civilian population.
Gracias, presidente.
Thank you, President.
Je remercie le représentant du
I thank
Mexique
the
de sa
representative of
déclaration.
Mexico
Je
for the
donne maintenant la
statement, and I
parole
now
au
give the floor
représentant de
to
la Chine.
the representative of China.
Mr. President.
我感谢苏亚雷
I
斯副秘书
thank
长的通报。
USG de Serpasoris for his briefing.
我理解今天会议
I
的主题
understand
是
that the
联
theme
合
of
国秘
today's
书处
meeting
的
is
履职
about
问题。
the performance of duties
我
by
先
the
谈这个
Secretariat.
问题。
I will talk about this issue first.
联合国宪章为秘书处及其工作人员履行职务确定了
The
相应
Charter
的
of the
规范。
United Nations
根据
establishes
宪章第100条，
corresponding regulations
秘书处
for the
工作人员在
Secretariat
执
and
行
its
公务
staff
时，
in the performance of
不
their
得寻
duties.
求或接受
According to
联合
Article
国之外
100
任
of the
何政
Charter,
府
in
或
the
当局
perforance
的
of their
指示，
duties, the Secretariat staff
并
shall
应
not
避
seek
免
or
采取
receive
任何可
instructions
能
from
反映
any
其立
government
场
or
的
from
行动。
any authority external to the organization.
秘书
They
处
shall
工作人员的
refrain
职
from
责
any
具有
action
专
which
属国
might
际性，
reflect their position. The
各会员
duties
国
of
应
the
予尊重，
Secretariat staff should be of an
并承诺
exclusively
不寻
international
求
character,
影响
and member
秘书
states
处
shall respect and
履行
undertake
职责。
not to seek to influence the Secretariat in the
恪
discharge
守
of their
宪章第100
responsibilities.
条相关规定，
Adherence to the relevant
是确保
provisions
秘
of
书
Article
处公正
100of
履
the
职
Charter
的
is an
重要保
important
障。
guarantee of the Secretariat's
秘书处应
impartiality
在
in
授权范
carrying
围
out
内
its
开展工作，
duties. The Secretariat should
加强
work
同
within
会
its
员国的沟
mandate,
通，
strengthen communication with
多做
member
有助
states,
于增
do
进会员国
more
互
that
信，
contributes to
维护
enhancing
会员国
mutual
团
trust
结的
and
事，
maintaining unity among
对会员国
member
之间
states,
出现的
and
不同
handle
意见，
differences of opinion
应
among
该
member
予
states
以
in
公
a
正
fair
稳
and
妥的处理。
appropriate manner.
主席先生，
Mr.
刚
President,
才很多成员
just
提
now,
到安理
many
会第
members
2231号决议的执行问题。
mentioned about the implementation of Resolution
安理会第2231号决议的主要
2233.
内容是核可伊核问题全面协议。
Main content of the
当
Security
前
Council
协议
Resolution
恢复履约谈判已
2231
到
is the
最后关
endorsement
头，
of JCPOA.
各方要保
As
持
the
理
current
性、克
negotiations
制，
on assuming the
准确
JCPOA
解读安理会第
implementation has reached
2231
the
号
final
决议及
critical
相关
stage,
文件
all
规定，
parties should exercise rational
避免
restraint
给
and
恢复履约
accurately
谈判
interpret the provisions
增添更
of
多的
the
复杂因素，破
2233
坏
and
当前
related
来之不易
documents
的
to avoid further
谈判成果。
complicating the negotiations on resuming JCPOA
中
implementation
方注意
and
到，
avoid
俄罗
undermining
斯
the hard-won results of the current
乌克兰
negotiations. China
美
has
国、
taken
英
note
国、
of the
法
letters
国
sent by
等有关
to
各
the
方
Council by Ukraine,
就
Iran,
无人机转
Russia,
让问题
France, and
向安理会
UK
的
and
致
other
函，
relevant parties on the transfer
也
of
注意到
drones.
各
China
方
has
对
also noted
S2016
the different
44号文件中规
interpretations
定
of the
的
Secretariat's
秘书
mandate
处授权
as set out in the
有不
note
同的解读。
S/2016/44.
在存在明显分歧的情况
Faced
下，
with clear differences,
安理会成员
the
应继
Council
续开
members
展协
should
商，
continue consultations
争取就秘书
to
处如何履行授
strive
权
to
做出
define
明确的界定，
clearly how the Secretariat should
避免
carry
仓促
out its
行动，
mandate and avoid
破坏
hasty action
安理
that
会的
would
团结。
undermine the unity of the Council.
谢谢主席。
I thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie le
I
représentant
thank
de
the
la Chine
representative
de
of
sa
China for
déclaration.
this
Je donne maintenant la
statement, and I now
parole à la
give the floor
représentante
to
des Émirats
the
arabes unis.
representative of the United Arab Emirates.
Mr. President, I thank Undersecretary General for Legal Affairs, Mr. Miguel de Serpa-Soares, for his briefing to the Security Council today. And I'd like to begin by addressing the most important element of this discussion for all of us today, the preservation of Article 100 of the UN Charter. It is stating the obvious that the independence of the Secretariat is necessary to the proper discharging of its duties. For that very reason, Article 100 includes the corollary obligation on the part of member states to respect that independence. Perhaps less apparent is how this independence is also in the common interest of member states. Fundamentally, it's quite simple. There cannot be sovereign equality of member states if some, whether through power or influence, are able to instruct the Secretariat to act or refrain from acting in a certain manner. Smaller states are most acutely aware of the risk, but really it should worry all states who do not enjoy the privilege of a permanent council seat. It would be naive of us to pretend that member states have never attempted to exert influence over the Secretariat. We may talk about attempts and even erosion at times. This is why it is so important today that we reaffirm the fundamental nature of Article 100 for the proper functioning of the Secretariat and the organization as a whole. Second, I'd like to address prior practice in the context of Resolution 2231. Because non-compliance with Resolution 2231 has implications across the Middle East, impartial documentation of the resolution's implementation is a matter of principle for the UAE. As is publicly known, we have welcomed the 2231 team of the UN Secretariat to the United Arab Emirates to inspect the Houthis' weapons and their debris or remnants, including most recently following their terrorist attack on my country. On all occasions, the UN Secretariat conducted independent and impartial inspections, which we believe were important to the findings and recommendations it then submitted to the Security Council. Third, the discussion today is a reminder of why clarity in our decisions and documents is so important. As a member of the Security Council, we strive to establish clear mandates in the resolutions we negotiate. While constructive ambiguity can facilitate reaching agreement on difficult issues, language prone to multiple interpretations or even misinterpretation can hinder collective action. Clear rules, applied equally, remain the cornerstone of the multilateral system. Thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie la représentante des Émirats arabes unis pour sa déclaration. Je donne maintenant la parole au représentant du Royaume-Uni.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I thank the USG for Legal Affairs for his briefing. This meeting represents another attempt by Russia to distract from its crimes in Ukraine and from Iran and Russia's failure to abide by their international obligations. Russia and Iran have been caught red-handed violating Resolution 2231. And Russia is now concocting an argument about process because they cannot defend their actions. We have seen them do this many times before. It is sad that this is now standard procedure for them. Based on the evidence provided by Ukraine and significant amounts of open source reporting, our view is clear. Iran has supplied UAVs to Russia, with which Russia is targeting Ukrainian civilians and civilian infrastructure. And these UAVs fall under the list in Annex B, paragraph 4 of UN Security Council Resolution 2231. Given no prior approval was sought or granted by the Security Council, these transfers represent violations of 2231. Unlike Russia, we are happy for our position to be verified. We've therefore expressed support for an impartial, expert investigation by the UN Secretariat in line with its mandate under 2231, so the facts can be clearly established. As Council members are aware, and as others have made clear already today, the UN 2231 Secretariat has conducted many such investigations, most recently in UAE and Saudi Arabia. So this is entirely in line with precedent and normal practice. Russia's claim we are trying to unduly influence the Secretariat is both absurd and hypocritical. It is Russia, in trying to sustain its disinformation, which first attacked the Secretary General and now the whole Secretariat just for doing their jobs. And it is Russia that has threatened to end all cooperation with the UN if the Secretariat does not do as Russia wants. That is not the behavior of a country with nothing to hide. That is the behavior of a bully. Colleagues, what's Russia trying to do here today? It is trying to make the UN's ability to monitor implementation of a key non-proliferation resolution subject to a new lock in the Security Council, in which Russia itself has a veto. Russia again trying to abuse its seat on the Council to shield itself from international scrutiny. Mr. President, further open source reporting suggests that Iran intends to transfer yet more UAVs and, potentially, ballistic missiles to Russia. Any such transfers of items could constitute further violations of Security Council Resolution 2231 and represent a significant escalation. In using Iranian drones to attack civilians as part of its war on Ukraine, Russia is breaching the UN Charter, is violating a Security Council resolution, and is probably committing war crimes. That is quite the hat trick. These increasingly desperate attempts to distract us from these facts and undermine the system must be rejected. Thank you.
Je remercie le représentant du Royaume-Uni de sa déclaration. Je donne maintenant la parole à la représentante du Kenya.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I thank Undersecretary General Mr. Miguel Suarez for his briefing. I also thank the Russian Federation for initiating this meeting. It provides an opportunity for member states to assess the challenges and opportunities of a strong and independent secretariat, particularly in regard to the good offices of the Secretary General. Mr. President, humanity needs a strong, independent secretariat and good offices of the Secretary General that are credible and respected. They are needed to intervene, to mediate, offer relief in conflict situations and emergencies worldwide, and to respond to the urgent call for development. Over time, the demand for the Secretary General's good offices, whether expressly provided for, such as under Security Council Resolution 2646, or through his own voice, have been growing. In regard to the war in Ukraine, which is the reason for today's meeting, the Secretary General's good offices were consequential in achieving the important Black Sea Grain Initiative. However, they have not been engaged in negotiations to the end of the war. One of the reasons for this, in our view, is the impact of years of member states questioning the Secretariat's impartiality and eroding its independence. The most powerful states, including some members of this council, have played a disproportionate role in this unfortunate trend. Prominent examples of this situation during our present term on the council are the claims and counterclaims of compromised impartiality when the Secretariat is reporting on disarmament, proliferation, and banned weapons in Syria. It appears that there is now a fully formed view that the Secretariat's impartiality equals standing on the halfway line between conflicting parties. However, this is not what the Charter means by impartiality. Instead, the Secretary General and the Secretariat are an independent organ whose first and last loyalty is to the upholding and defense of the Charter. Mr. President, even as we push for urgent Security Council reforms, we acknowledge that a more urgent task is the membership rededicating itself to the principles of the Charter. Otherwise, multilateralism, as expressed in the United Nations, is unlikely to come close to its meeting this promise. We propose that the most important starting point is to renew our respect and utilization of the Secretary General's good offices for the prevention and resolution of conflicts. And we propose 3 ways to strengthen those good offices. The first is to redefine impartiality and protect the independence of the UN Secretariat. The reason Article 100 protects the Secretary General and the staff from external influence or instruction is not just to be a neutral referee. It is to enable them to speak truth to power in the defense of the letter and the spirit of the Charter. In practice, this means the membership appreciating that the Secretary General is not partial to a party in a conflict when he speaks up about its outrages against the Charter. The Secretary General must be fully partial to the Charter, and he should fully exercise Article 99 without regard for the approval or disapproval of any state, no matter how pivotal in global affairs. His or her doing so is a duty that cannot be shirked, and therefore his good offices should not be marginalized from the mediated settlement of conflicts. This should be the case in regard to the war in Ukraine or other wars involving members of this council. Second is the appreciation and use of the Secretary General's fact-finding capabilities. In order to strengthen the role of the UN and enhance its effectiveness in maintaining international peace and security, member states adopted Resolution 46/59 in 1991. The resolution recognizes the need for the Security Council to have knowledge of all relevant facts in performing functions relevant to our mandate. It further recognizes the Secretary General's fact-finding capabilities, requires him to monitor the state of international peace and security for early warning, and share relevant information with the Security Council, making use of the information gathering capabilities of the Secretariat. The Security Council needs to make use of the reservoir of capabilities under the Secretary General to contribute to the effectiveness of our discussions and decisions. In the situation in Ukraine, rather than argue about the facts on the ground here in the Council, where most members have no independent means to ascertain their veracity, we challenge the conflicting parties to agree to UN fact-finding and verification. This would be key to preventing and minimizing actions contrary to the Charter and international law. Third is on the need to continually strengthen regional good offices. Article 33 of the Charter recognizes the important role of regional agencies and arrangements in dispute resolution. Strong regional mechanisms have increasingly played a key role in preventing escalations of conflicts and their termination in the Security Council. We are proud of the Africa Peace and Security Architecture and its deployment of multi-layered and coordinated good offices. From the chairpersons of the Union and the Commission, the panel of the WISE, and the regional economic communities, it offers options and redundancies in the protection of peace and security. Strengthening the good offices of the Secretary General and linking them operationally and strategically to Africa's improving architecture would be an immense win for peace. We urge other regions to take steps to develop and deploy similar regional arrangements for early warning, prevention, and resolution of disputes. Finally, Mr. President, I reaffirm Kenya's commitment to the purposes and principles of the UN Charter and our support for independence and impartiality of the Secretary General and his staff. Thank you.
Je remercie la représentante du Kenya de sa déclaration. Je vais maintenant faire une déclaration en ma qualité de représentant du Gabon. Nous remercions le secrétaire général adjoint et conseiller juridique Miguel de Serpa Suarez pour son intervention éclairante. L'objet de cette réunion concerne la portée et l'interprétation d'une disposition de la Charte des Nations Unies, en l'occurrence l'article 100, en lien avec le rôle du secrétariat conformément à la lettre et à l'esprit de la charte, ainsi que la pratique subséquente admise. Nous avons suivi avec attention la lecture autorisée du conseiller juridique sur cette préoccupation qui relève de sa compétence. Et nous nous en tenons à sa lecture et à son interprétation qui nous paraît suffisamment détaillée parce qu'elle est drapée du manteau de l'impartialité qui fonde la réputation du secrétariat. Nous voulons réaffirmer notre attachement au respect de l'intégrité de la Charte des Nations Unies en tant que ciment de notre vivre ensemble de la communauté internationale. Et c'est la Charte qui doit être le socle des indispensables négociations par lesquelles nous pouvons faire taire les armes et mettre fin à la guerre en Ukraine. Je reprends les fonctions de président du Conseil. Le représentant de la Fédération de Russie a demandé la parole pour une autre intervention. Je la lui donne.
Mr. President, today we didn't hear anything groundbreaking in the statements of those countries who called for an investigation in the Secretariat. The same cunning allegations about the obligation of the Secretariat to respond to requests of member states. Specifically touching was when we heard allegations of Russia's violations of Resolution 2231 from the United States of America, the main violator of said resolution. The Secretariat needs to respond to requests of member states, but to act on the basis of a clear, explicit mandate in the Charter of the United Nations, not on the basis of the desires of certain countries. Mentioning our request in the investigation Yelenovka, our Western colleagues, as is usual, are being sly and cunning. This has nothing to do with the issue under discussion today, nor anything to do with Resolution 2231. The question that we put is different. What is the Secretariat of the United Nations guided by in expressing a willingness to engage in investigation into alleged violations of Resolution 2231? upon the request not of the entire Security Council, but rather some member states. Where does this mandate come from?
Они ссылаются на
They
практику, а
refer
не на
to
правовые нормы.
practice, not to
И
legal
не
norms,
упоминают,
and they
что
fail to
мы
mention
письменно и
that
последовательно
we, in
протестовали
writing and
против каждого
consistently
упоминания
objected to each
расследования,
mention of
нарушающего
the
резолюцию
investigations of
2237.
violations of Resolution 2231.
Тот факт, что
The
определенная
fact that
информация уже
certain
включалась
information has
в
already
доклады
been
Генерального
included
секретаря,
in the Secretary General's
не
reports
свидетельствует о
does
наличии
not
некой
attest to the
легитимной
presence of
практики,
any
тем более
legitimate
практики
practice,
Совета.
especially council practice.
Такая практика
This
изначально расходилась
practice
с
from the very
мандатом Генерального
beginning
секретаря
emanated from the mandate of
и
the Secretary
секретариата в
General
целом.
and the Secretariat as a whole.
Повторяем, ни у
We
Генерального
repeat,
секретаря, ни у
neither the Secretary
секретариата просто
General
нет такого
nor the
мандата.
Secretariat has this mandate.
И Россия всегда
And the Russian
против
Federation
такой
has
практики
always
возражала.
objected to this
Как
practice.
можно говорить о
How can
формировании
we talk
практики в
about
условиях ее
establishment of a
противоречия
practice
мандату,
when it runs counter to
а
mandate
также постоянных возражений
and
с оппонентами членов
persistent
Совета?
objections from members of the
Есть
council?
такой термин
There is a
persistent
term,
objection,
persistent objector,
который исключает
and this
формирование практики.
precludes the
А мы
establishment of
возражали
practice.
против
We objected
этого еще с
to
2016 года и
this from
продолжаем делать это и
2016,
сегодня.
and we continue to do so today.
Нас сегодня призывали
Today, we were
согласиться с
called upon to
расследованием,
consent
если
to an
нам нечего
investigation
скрывать.
if we have nothing to
Но
hide.
вопрос не в
But the
том,
question lies
скрывает
not
кто-то
in
что-то
whether
или нет.
somebody is hiding something
Вопрос
or not.
легитимности
The
подобного
question lies in
расследования
the
в
legitimacy of such
отсутствии
an
соответствующего
investigation
мандата со
in the
стороны Совета
absence of the relevant
Безопасности, который
mandate of the
единственный
Security
может его
Council,
дать.
which alone can hand down such a mandate.
Представитель Ирландии вообще
Representative of
заявил,
Ireland
что кроме
said
писем
that
запросов
beyond
никакого
written requests,
иного мандата со
there's no
стороны
other
Совета
mandate from
Безопасности
the
не
Security
требуется.
Council
Это
required.
удивительное
This is a
заявление от
surprising
координатора
statement from the
ячейки
coordinator of the
2231.
2231 cell.
Это какой-то
This
полнейший правовой
is
нигилизм.
complete legal nihilism.
Мы бы посоветовали
We
коллегам из
would
Ирландии лучше
advise
учить
our
материальную
Irish
часть,
colleague to
иначе нам
consider the
придется
material
усомниться в
section, because
способности этой
otherwise we
страны
will doubt
возглавлять
this
этот
country's
вспомогательный орган Совета.
ability to head up this subsidiary body of the Security
Позиция
Council.
лицемерного
The position
передергивания
of
со стороны западных
hypocritical
стран
distortions by
уже,
Western
собственно, никого не
countries
должна удивлять, и
is
нас она
hardly
не
surprising
удивляет.
to
Но
anybody.
сегодня
It certainly doesn't
отдельные
surprise
члены
us. But
Совета
today,
превзошли
certain
сами
members of the
себя.
Council went far and beyond themselves.
Как вынесение
How
вопроса
is the
соблюдения
position of the
мандата
question
по
of
резолюции
compliance with the mandate under
2231
Resolution
на заседании
2231?
Совета,
How is
который
putting this
ее и
forward
принял,
during a Security
может
Council meeting, the
считаться
Security Council which adopted
атакой на
it? How can it be
секретариат,
viewed as an attack
шантажом
against the
генерального
Secretariat,
секретаря и
bribery,
уж тем более
blackmail
нарушением
of the Secretary
статьи
General,
100
and
Устава ООН?
especially violation
Это
of
излюбленный
Article
пример
100?
наших
And this
западных
is the
коллег
favorite example of Western colleagues that they
обвинять
take up.
других в том, что
They
они делают
love
сами.
accusing others of what they
Но в
themselves
целом,
do.
господин
But on
председатель,
the
мы
whole, Mr.
признательны
President, we are
западным
grateful
коллегам
to
за
our Western
исчерпывающий
colleagues
перечень
for the
нарушений
exhaustive
секретариатом
list
ООН
of violations by the UN
статьи 100
Secretariat of
Устава
Article
ООН в
100
виде
of the United Nations Charter
нелегитимных
in the
расследований,
form of
осуществленных
illegitimate
ячейкой
investigations carried out by the
2231, вопреки
2231
своему
unit,
мандату.
contrary to the mandate.
Они теперь окажутся в протоколе
And
нашего
this will
заседания.
now be on the
Как и
written
то, что в
record of our
каждом из этих
meeting,
случаев мы
as
указывали на
will
эти
be
нарушения.
the fact that we
А вы
each
пытаетесь
time
сейчас
pointed
заставить
out to
секретариат
these violations.
совершить
And
новое
you are compelling
нарушение,
Secretary to
мотивируя
once
это тем, что
again
раньше
engage in new
такие нарушения
violations,
уже
motivated by the
совершались.
fact that the violations
Нам
had
это всем
already been
хорошо
committed
знакомо.
previously. This is
Я бы
something which
хотел
we are all well
вновь
familiar with. I wish
задать
to
вопрос
once again put a question
господину
to
Саарошу
Mr.
и
Suarez
ответить на вопрос,
to kindly respond to the question.
будет ли запуск расследований по запросу отдельных стран-членов, а не всего Совета Безопасности, являться нарушением статьи 100 Устава ООН и положения резолюции 2231? И будет ли согласие на их выполнение со стороны секретариата ООН нарушением Устава ООН?
Constitute a breach of the United Nations Charter. Thank you.
Je remercie le représentant de la
Thank the
Fédération de
representative of the
Russie de sa
Russian Federation for
déclaration.
that statement.
Je donne maintenant
I now give the
la
floor
parole à M. Miguel de Serpa Suarez pour qu'il puisse
Serpa
répondre
Suarez, so he can
aux
respond
observations qui ont été formulées
to
par
the
les membres du
observations
Conseil. M. Serpa
made
Suarez,
by
vous avez la
members of the
parole.
Council. You have the floor, sir.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you,
Je n'ai
Mr.
pas d'autres
President. I do not have
commentaires
any
sur
other
les
comments
différentes interventions.
on the different statements.
Sur la question
As
posée
to
par le
the question
représentant de la Fédération
by
Russie,
the representative
je
of the
voudrais
Russian
dire que
Federation,
dans mon
I
intervention
should say
initiale, j'ai
that in my
décrit
initial statement, I
le
described
texte et la pratique d'application
the
de l'article 100 de la
practice
Charte.
in
J'ai
terms of
décrit
application of the charter,
le texte et la pratique de
and I talked about the text
l'application de la
and
résolution
practice based on
2231.
Resolution
Je n'ai rien à
2231, and I have nothing
ajouter
to
à
add
ma intervention
to
initiale.
my initial statement.
Et sur cette dernière question,
And
c'est une
on this
question
last
hypothétique. Je ne
issue,
suis pas en mesure
it's
de
really a
répondre
matter
à
of
des
text.
questions
I'm not in a
hypothétiques.
position
Merci.
to respond to hypothetical questions. Thank you.
Je remercie
I thank
Monsieur Serpa
Mr.
Suarez pour les précisions qu'il a apportées.
the
Je
additional
donne maintenant la
information,
parole à
and
la
I now
représentante de
give the
l'Ukraine.
floor to the representative of Ukraine.
Thank you, Mr. President, distinguished members of the Security Council. We join other states in thanking Under-Secretary General for his briefing today. This meeting represents yet another attempt by the Russian Federation to distract attention from its crime of aggression, war crimes, and crimes against humanity in our country. 8.5 years of Russia's aggression against Ukraine, including 8 months of full-scale invasion, is a blatant violation of the UN Charter. In this light, Russia's appeal to the UN Charter is hypocritical, cynical. The Russian Federation remains consistent in its practices of constant threats and blackmail, this time against the UN Secretariat. We strongly condemn this unacceptable pressure and threats to reconsider cooperation with the UN if the UN Secretariat uses their authority to investigate implementation of the Security Council resolution. Deliberate misuse of the Charter provisions to impede the investigation is a clear attempt to put a pressure on the Secretariat with the aim to avoid own responsibility. We express our full support to the Secretary General and the UN Secretariat in line with our commitments under the provisions of the Article 100 of the UN Charter. Mr. President, last Friday, Ukraine informed the Council regarding the use of long-range UAVs of Iranian origin by Russia in its attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure in my country. This represents a blatant violation of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action signed by China, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, the United States, the European Union, and Russia itself, and then adopted by the UNSC Resolution 2231 of 2015. That's why, as you are aware, on 14 October 2022, Ukraine officially addressed the presidency of the Security Council and requested to start the relevant independent investigation. In our letter, we drew attention to the alarming situation with respect to the transfers of Mohajer and Shahed series UAVs from Iran to Russia, specifically in late August 2022. Paragraph 4 of Annex B to Resolution 2231 prohibits the transfer from Iran of all items, materials, equipment, goods, and technology set out in S/2015/546, unless approved by the Security Council on a case-by-case basis. Both Mohajer and Shahed UAVs meet the parameters of S/2015/546, at least under Category 2, because they are capable of a range of equal or greater than 300 kilometers. Further, we noted that the Mohajer series UAVs is manufactured by Quds Aviation, which is subject to the asset freeze provision of paragraph 6 of Annex B to Resolution 2231. All states are required to freeze the funds of financial assets of designated entities. According to the information available, no state submitted these shipments for review by the Security Council pursuant to Resolution 2231, and thus they did not receive advance case-by-case approval as required by Annex B to Resolution 2231. Mr. President, in using Iranian drones to attack civilians as well as civilian and critical infrastructure of Ukraine, Russia is violating the UN Charter, international humanitarian law, and a Security Council resolution. we see enough evidence to deem that the transfers of UAVs from Iran to Russia should be considered. Moreover, the international community should be informed based on the results of this investigation. So we requested the UN experts to visit Ukraine at the earliest possible opportunity to inspect recovered Iranian origin UAVs. We believe the findings of the Secretariat's investigations will profoundly contribute to assessing implementation of Resolution 2231. The UN investigation should start immediately. We call on all states to consider any possible steps to stop this kind of UAVs, missile or conventional arms transfers from Iran to be used in the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine. Thank you.
Je remercie la représentante de l'Ukraine de sa déclaration. Je donne maintenant la parole au représentant de la République islamique d'Iran.
In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, I thank you, Mr. President, for convening this meeting. Before I begin, I would like to express my sorrow and sadness that our people and my country were today targeted by a terrorist attack, whereby initial reports, the couple of armed gunmen attacked the holy religious site known as Shah Cheragh Shrine in Shiraz, which at least 15 people murdered and injured 21 others. This is a heinous terrorist attack on civilians, including children and women. Iran once again condemns terrorism in all its forms and manifestation as a real and grave threat to international peace and security. And it is expected that the Security Council condemn such a heinous crime explicitly and strongly. Mr. President, first and foremost, I would like to clarify and emphasize that Iran's participation at this meeting is confined to the matter raised to relation to Resolution 2231, which is directly related to and affect Iran. As a result, I feel compelled to attend this meeting in order to elaborate on Iran's position on the claims made against my country in the context of UN Security Council Resolution 2231. Certain Security Council members, including United States, accused Iran of violating Resolution 2231, despite the fact that these certain states continue to violate all their explicit legal obligations under that same resolution. The main example is the illegal withdrawal of the United States from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which is still openly used as bargaining leverage today. Without a doubt, continuing such unlawful acts violate international law, the United Nations Charter, and Security Council Resolution 2231. Now, in yet another disparate efforts, these states have attempted to establish an entirely artificial linkage between Security Council Resolution 2231 and the use of unmanned aerial vehicles in ongoing conflict in Ukraine by disseminating unsubstantiated and erroneous information, raising inaccurate assumptions, and restoring the totally flawed, arbitrary, and misleading interpretation of that resolution. Mr. President, let us be clear and elaborate on Iran's position on Resolution 2231. The claim regarding the violation of paragraph 4 of Annex B to the Resolution 2231 is an erroneous, arbitrary, and yet misleading interpretation that contradicts the letter and the spirit of the paragraph. That paragraph clearly refers to the restriction of items, materials, equipment, goods, and technology that the state determines could contribute to the development of nuclear weapons delivery system. As has been stated in our letter on 19 and 24 October addressed to the Security Council and the Secretary General, Iran has never produced or supplied, nor does it intend to produce or supply items, materials, equipment, goods, and technology that could contribute to the development of nuclear weapons delivery system. With regards to the request of Secretariat to conduct what is referred to as an investigation, the resolution itself provides no legal basis for such an investigation. Furthermore, the President of Security Council noted dated 16 January 2016, S/2016/44, clearly specified the mandate of Secretariat regarding the resolution, which is only administrative support. The Secretariat is tasked with assisting the facilitator in the organization and staffing of informal Security Council meeting related to the implementation of Resolution 2231, managing all incoming and outgoing communication related to the resolution's implementation, drafting correspondence, speaking notes, and briefing of the facilitator related to the resolution's implementation, and maintaining and archiving all information and documents relating to the resolution. Having said that, Mr. President, I would like to emphasize once more that any misuse of the function described in the note S/2016/44 for conducting the so-called investigation requested will be illegal and in clear violation of Secretariat's mandate. Finally, Mr. President, I would like to reiterate Iran's clear and consistent position on the conflict in Ukraine. Since the beginning of the conflict, Iran has maintained a position of active neutrality and has emphasized that all UN member states must fully respect the purpose and principles enshrined in the United Nations Charter as well as international law, including sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity. Iran consistently advocates for peace and an immediate end to the Ukraine conflict. Despite bilateral defense cooperation agreement, Iran has never provided the parties with weapons for use in the Ukraine conflict, either before or after the conflict. Aside from the legal and political position, Iran believes from a moral point of view that providing military support could not be intended to end the war, but rather to escalate it, increasing damage and destruction and causing more suffering for civilians. That is why Iran has urged the parties to uphold their obligations under the international humanitarian law and conduct consultations to protect civilians and critical infrastructure from military targets or attacks. Against that background, my delegation rejects totally all unfounded allegations made against my country at this meeting by certain states. I thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie le représentant de la République islamique d'Iran de sa déclaration. Il n'y a plus d'orateurs, d'oratrices inscrits sur la liste. La séance est levée.